Fan games are supposed to be a celebration of what we love, right? But every now and then, one comes along with something darker lurking beneath the surface. This is Juniors, a FNAF-inspired fan game with breathtaking visuals, haunting mechanics, and a storyline that's equal parts brilliant, unsettling, and kinda weird. But the game itself isn't the only mystery here. Behind its retro design and chilling atmosphere lies a secret about the creators that's just as eerie as the game they've built. Stick around as I unravel the brilliance of Juniors, as well as what sucks about it, and uncover the strange truth about what went on behind the scenes. Juniors is a fan game that goes above and beyond in certain areas, and in others, just falls flat. Juniors is an investigative type horror game. The game opens with a tutorial. Using a claymation, the user must figure out which animatronic is possessed. The tutorial does not mirror the actual game, but it is a good indicator of what the general gameplay is about. Right after the tutorial, a cutscene plays, setting the scene for you. The protagonist finds themselves in an unrecognizable area and shows Pallbear. You are suddenly thrust headfirst into an area called the Barrens, a place between life and death. It is unsettling. You are near the only buildings in the entire area. It feels you and Pallbear are not alone, as in the distance, the skybox itself seems to have its eyes on you. Pallbear gives you a deal. He'll help you with the investigation for his freedom by defeating some malevolent force inside Juniors. You agree, and Pallbear teleports you to the real world. This office is not familiar. There are no doors, no lights, no ways to protect yourself. However, there is no need to, well for now. The gameplay revolves around the ghost possessing a random animatronic, and it's up for you to find that imposter. The way to identify the possessed is to see how the ghost interacts with the environment. The only way to deduce the first night is if the lights are flickering. The light flicker mechanic is very finicky for new players, as it looks like every light is flickering. But the real difference is if the camera itself is flickering. It's not really explained that well, so it just kind of falls flat a little bit. However, other than that, the only real way to lose is the animatronic stability mechanic. But I'll get to that in Night 2, as Night 1 is super easy. After discovering the ghost twice, the night ends and you are thrust back in the main menu. However, it looks a little different. But more on that later. You talk to Pallbear some more and discover that old Polly is terrified of the ghost haunting Juniors, but he expresses a little hope and Night 2 begins. I would argue that Night 2 is where the real game begins, and there's a little learning curve because either I'm just stupid and there's a skill issue, or Night 1 has no real threat. Anyways, the real way to lose, as mentioned before, is the stability mechanic. You might have seen it in the gameplay thus far, but every animatronic has a stability mechanic that goes down gradually, or even more if you guess the ghost incorrectly. Once that meter gets to 0, you lose and get jump scared. And the jump scares are some of my favorite ever. They are beautifully done, but they are loud. They really get you almost every time. Even the times I knew exactly when they were coming, I still got spooked up. Just the way the camera forces you into frame and then a loud boom just gets you. Back on track, the way to keep up with the meter is to call an animatronic in for fixing. However, if you somehow call the animatronic that's also haunted, you'll die. So it's this game of cat and mouse trying to find the ghost and keep it at arm's length. After a while of trial and error, a standard strategy I developed is to call in an animatronic before the ghost possesses, as you also have a little grace period before it does anything. So that way you get rid of one of the 6 animatronics. Speaking of animatronics, let's just talk about them. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy all work effectively the same, just teleporting around the map, pretty standard stuff. However, Balloon Baby and the Marionette are a little different. Balloon Baby will have a stability meter all messed up if he's haunted. The Marionette, however, is invisible. The only way to deduce if the Marionette is on camera is if her music box is playing in the camera you are looking at. Other than that, she works the same as the rest of the cast. The only real difference on Night 2 is if you have to find the ghost 3 times, but the ghost can also leave a handprint once its possessed animatronic leaves the room. I really like this mechanic because trying to identify which specific animatronic it is that left that's haunted is a little odd because multiple tend to leave at the same time. I am assuming the AI itself works on movement opportunities or timers like the original games, so it introduces a much more investigative feel to the gameplay itself. Once the night ends, you are shown a tape asking if you want to watch it or not. Obviously you watch it and a beautiful claymation cutscene plays. The cutscene depicts Freddy carrying an arm to a door with a note on it saying, "Beware the mangle." A little tangent on the cutscene itself. I do not know if it is a true claymation, but the fact I cannot tell between it if it's real or not just shows how talented the 3D artists are for Juniors. They really went above and beyond here. Once the scene ends, you go back to talk to Pallbear about the tape. You explain to him and theorize that the ghost is building a new body of a mangle of parts. Not too much is different here except the possessed new abilities to move your camera. It is a pretty interesting mechanic that if you try looking at the possessed animatronic, it forces the camera away from it. 5 correct guesses later and a new cutscene plays. It starts off by Clay Freddy freaking out over a drawing of the mangle that he saw in the previous tape. He shares the drawing with Bonnie, who soon falls victim to the ghost. The next night, you meet with Pallbear to discuss the mangle. He goes on to explain that he is who the ghost wants. My one critique that I'll share here is that the writing makes it seem that the main character is like a brother to another mother to old Polyboy. Pallbear is a clear reason to trust us, but the game never really explains why we trust him so much in return. I have a lot more to say about the writing later, trust me. Night 4 begins. It starts off as any other night, except that animatronics seem to be a lot more alive in this night. You need to correctly assume which animatronic the ghost is in 6 times now. However, there is a new mechanic. Sometimes when possessed in the camera will shut off and you must use a process of elimination to deduce. This is definitely my favorite mechanic. It feels the most consistent, and I feel a lot more detective-like seeing who is not in frame. It works really well as a final added mechanic. Oops, kinda spoiled it there. The night ends by you finding a tape labeled, "I know you are with him," signaling Pallbear's suspicions is correct. She knows you two are working together. This tape depicts Chica having a nightmare and suddenly getting possessed by the ghost and given a part to the basement. And suddenly we are shown the mangle. Friday night. We must use all of our skills to deduce the ghost 7 times. The only difference is the ghost will immediately find a new host after getting deduced. This cuts out any sigh of relief you may have and leave little room for error. I found the best strategy here is if you know who is possessed, you can take some time and fix some animatronics in the meantime. Then once the conveyor is free, select the ghost and can immediately call in a new animatronic. This has helped me immensely in the final night as it cuts down on issues of bringing in a new haunted animatronic. Once the night ends, a new cutscene plays as it shows our favorite trio of Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica stand in front of the mangle. As you return to Pallbear, he explains how to get to the basement and mentions they turned the basement into a game. How surprising. He goes on to say he wants to trap the ghost where he is, in the Barrens, with him. After this masterfully crafted plan, you say your goodbyes in case the plan actually comes to fruition, and you enter the basement. You are met with a very familiar office, almost too familiar. Yes, it's literally FNAF 2. The gameplay is essentially the same as FNAF 2, except the fact that I'm not great at it, and forgot some essential mechanics and lost a balloon baby twice, taking my flashlight and subsequently dying to Foxy. There are some cosmetic differences, as instead of the Freddy mask, you're using the Bonnie mask, which is pretty interesting I guess. There definitely could have been something unique put here, but the gameplay is a nice change of pace. From moving from more active gameplay style to playing passively and reacting to animatronics. The lore reason for enemy FNAF 2 is the ghost tries to trick you as you enter the basement after heavily damaging the animatronics, but of course something else could have been done here, you know? However, at 3 AM, things change. The ghost sacrifices all the animatronics to complete the mangle. The real fight begins against the mangle and the ghost girl, whatever her name is. The fight is pretty simple. Avoid mangle and attack the ghost. How do you do that? The mangle will periodically check in on you with its owl tail, accompanied with sound cues, so you have to react with Bonnie's mask, which hides you from the tail. At the same time, mangle will move around the map and sometimes enter your doorway, you have to flash it, or them I guess, so mangle isn't too hard to take care of. Now, since the gameplay has switched again to active mode, you will have to actively seek out the ghost girl and flash her. She can be pretty hard to see, and if you do not flash her in time, she will break the camera. This is annoying for obvious reasons, but if she breaks all the cameras, the mangle will jump scare you. Also, the mangle's appearance is really cool. I like what they've done with it. They obviously took inspiration with it being a mangle of parts alongside the makeup, but the owly look the tail has and it being used as a gameplay mechanic is pretty neat. So once you finally beat the ghost with camera flashes, somehow the night ends and a weird writing nightmare begins. After 6 AM hits, the ghost gets inside the protagonist's head and meets Pallbear and then threatens him. The visual cutscene is a little funny looking back on it, as it just kind of looks like a little girl playing with a stuffed animal. the game suddenly shifts into full-on insanity. The protagonist somehow gets in his own head and stabs a ghost with a metal rod. Where did it come from? How does that even work? The game never explains it, and it leaves me with more questions than answers. For example, if she is inside his head, I don't know what to say here. After this crazy scene, the narrator proceeds to tell us that Juniors opens back up with a negative impression because of everything that happened. So, before we get into everything else, let's just talk about the extras in Juniors. There's a section where you can check out some pretty cool stuff. Extra renders, behind the scenes content, scrapped ideas, and even a look at how the animatronics come to life. It's all pretty neat. Now, let's talk about the Seniors DLC for Juniors, which is really tough. It introduces 2 new animatronics, Wolf Guy, or Dog Guy or whatever, and then another Dog Guy. These 2 are a real challenge. They don't follow the usual patterns and don't have a traditional kill mechanic. Wolf Guy uploads viruses into your HUD, and if you don't clear them, you can't repair animatronics. The other Dog Guy shows up at your door, and if you don't deal with him, animatronic stability drops faster, so you're constantly juggling between 2 tasks, watching for the ghost and keeping an eye on both Dog Guys. It's like a game of cat and mouse, except the game's the cat and you're basically already dead. To finish, you need to find the ghost 15 times in a row with no breaks. If you want me to try and beat it, let me know. Before we get into the worst parts of this game, let's just get into what I didn't like so much. There is so much to love here, but there's also just so much that takes away from a good game that prevented it from being a great game. The most obvious part is the story. Like I said before, the game leaves us with more questions than answers, which is what you do not want a conclusion to do, as it's just not a conclusion anymore. It's a cliffhanger for story beats that should have been answered before. For example, the protagonist. We know nothing about him except he likes Pallbear and he's a paranormal investigator, and that's it. I can understand if the writers want us to self-insert our personalities in the protagonist, but it just doesn't work as it's a supernatural world that we cannot relate to. The Girls Wikipedia page is bigger than the protagonist, and she only shows up for a single night. Speaking of the Ghost Girl, there's a lot of questions of her too. Why is she haunting Juniors? Why does she hate Polly? Maybe they want us to assume she has the same backstory as Cassidy from FNAF, but that would just be kind of lazy writing. And after this crazy cutscene when she gets stabbed as a ghost and dies, I already showed my statement on that. The writing could have been so much stronger here as the art design and soundtrack are beautiful. They are some of the best parts of the game as they carry the gameplay. I commended the gameplay earlier, but I wanted to save my grievances for this section. The gameplay could have been expanded on so much more and maybe had like a single QA member, as the gameplay is either a slog or the trenches back in World War I. The later nights could have been expanded with another animatronic or two to spice up the gameplay. For example, they could have had a janitor that comes in and cleans the back room where you're trying to fix the animatronics, but while he is there, the back room is closed and the way to deter him is to stall on cameras, much like Foxy, but he's not an immediate teleport animatronic. He can move through the cameras with getting closer to your room until he stays up in your fixing room, and every time he gets in there he stays for longer, or he stays however long depending on how many animatronics that got fixed. That way, you must keep track of another entity and the camera map is utilized, and I made this up just now. Moving on to the final night, just copying FNAF 2 isn't exactly the greatest decision they could have done here. They had such a big opportunity to do something great here. At least they added the boss fight, which I enjoyed myself in, but there could have been more. The boss fight didn't give me a sense of urgency or terror, it just felt like another gameplay loop to go through. Like I said before, the art and soundtrack team need their props, but they just got bogged down by the writing. In the spirit of talking about things that could have been improved, let's talk about where things should have been improved but were definitely intentional. The FNAF Juniors developers, Ultranite, Raminoff, Mechless, were part of a secret group chat that operated for over a year, collecting private content from various fan game projects, including those associated with the official fanverse. Their intention was to eventually leak this content on 4chan. Among the materials gathered were private game assets and even personal content relating to Scott Cawthon, such as family photos and a wedding video. They gained access to this content by integrating themselves into development teams and forming connections within the community. This situation was uncovered when an anonymous source archived the group chat and provided the info to developer Kane Carter, who then informed Scott Cawthon. However, rather than taking further action, Kane allegedly attempted to suppress the situation. Following this exposure, those involved quickly left multiple community servers, and Raminoff later announced his departure after Junior's release without providing a reason, but I'm sure we can make one up. The situation surrounding Juniors and its developers is for sure complex. The game itself is a well-crafted experience that highlights the creativity of the FNAF fan game community, but the controversy behind it raises ethical questions about separating the art from the artist. Some may choose to appreciate Juniors for what it is, while others may feel uncomfortable supporting it given the circumstances. At the end of the day, the game is a well-crafted experience with certain parts that undeniably anchor it down, and some parts just cannot carry the entire ship. But it is also free. You didn't waste $40 or even $60 to play this, just a few hours of your life, which is fine in my eyes. Maybe the answers I asked for will get answers in Juniors into the flip side coming out, whenever it ever does. Comment down below if there are any games you want me to cover, and as always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.